Welcome to the Breakup Recovery Podcasts by your host, Barbara Stevens. Discover the wisdom and remarkable insights of Barbara Stevens, breakup recovery mentor, author, and public speaker. Barbara offers programs and solutions for any breakup so you can turn your life around, create lasting changes for the better, and embrace life again. Hello and welcome to Breakup Recovery Podcast. I'm Barbara Stevens and I'm a breakup recovery mentor. And in this episode I welcome Ali Wilkes. Now Ali has worked with families for over 20 years, supporting them and trying to find their way into health and strength. She has completed an undergraduate degree in psychology and sociology and a master's degree in family studies with a focus on family violence. And if that is not enough, Ali has completed a step family coaching certification. She is passionate about family health and well-being on all levels, especially for stepmums. So welcome, Ali.
Thank you.
So Ali, what do you find the biggest struggles divorced women have when they're going through a divorce?
So the biggest struggles that I see women going through is that they have a lot of challenges around grief and loss cycles. So the biggest thing that I see is that while they're trying to manage grief and loss and working through their own issues and challenges around grief and loss, they also have to support their children going through grief and loss. That is, of course, if they have children, right? Because you were saying women going through challenges after divorce, but definitely it's navigating their own and supporting their children, because as a parent, they're carrying the burden of managing everybody and supporting everybody in their grief. And that can be really, really hard to do, just because when you're dealing with grief and loss after a major disruption in your life and kind of your life trajectory, it makes it really hard to be present and available for children if you have them.
And sometimes I guess you can be so lost in your own grief and loss of the end of your relationship, you don't often see what the children are going through, or you don't identify that they do need some help.
That's correct. I mean, and there's two kind of avenues for that, because there are the women who are the ones who are choosing to leave the relationship, and then there are those who have not chosen to leave the relationship. And typically what I've come across is that the women who choose to leave the relationship, although they're still going through their grief and loss, they can be a little bit further along the path in terms of when the relationship ends, because they've chosen to say, okay, I think this relationship is not working for me anymore. You know, we've tried counseling, or he's refusing counseling, whatever the situation may be. And by the time they've reached that decision, they've been kind of thinking about it and processing and making a decision about whether this is good for them or not. So they may, in fact, be farther along the grief and loss process than those who may have been told by their partner that I don't want to do this anymore, our relationship is over, or there's no hope in trying to fix this. So that actually also plays a part in the grief and loss cycle as well for women. And for those that are, advised by their partner that this is done and we're over and there's no hope on fixing this, then that becomes much more of a shock for them. And I think it takes a longer for them to manage, and they may have a harder time coping. But the other interesting thing about divorce is not everybody sees divorce as a negative thing, believe it or not. I'll tell you a funny story, Barbara. I was out with some friends, and one of my friends, she was celebrating we call it a stagette here in Canada. I don't know what they call it in Australia, but it's basically a celebratory event that these women get together as kind of a last hurrah before they get married. Some celebratory drinking and going out to the bar and whatnot and dancing and just enjoying the last bit of freedom, so to speak.
Oh, just before a bride gets married?
That's correct, yeah.
We call that a hen's night.
Oh, I've actually heard that. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So, which makes me kind of giggle. But over at the next table beside me was a woman who was actually celebrating her divorce. So for some people, divorce can be, as I was mentioning, it can be an absolutely devastating experience because, all your plans and your life trajectory and your retirement and all of those things, you have the vision of how this is supposed to go. And that completely rocks your world. It is just undermines or undoes the foundation of your relationship. And that's where I think, some women have a very, very hard time managing grief and loss. I mean, there's various stages in grief and loss that a person has to navigate. And even though that they call it a cycle of grief and loss, it's not a smooth transition from A to D to get there. Sometimes you're going back and forth between those various stages.
When you went through your own divorce, Ali, did you have children?
Actually, I didn't go through a divorce. I married a man who was divorced.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah. So maybe I should tell you a little bit about my story because I'm stepmom. So I married a man who had 3 children from his previous relationship. And we met in, let me see, oh my goodness, it's going back now. We met in 2003 and started dating in 2004 and got married in, it'll be 10 years this year, so 2007. I had to stop and think. I haven't personally been through divorce, but I actually in university I was engaged to a man and we were planning on getting married, and it was a very painful process for me when we realized that we weren't going to be getting married. So no divorce, but I certainly have seen many of my, well, a couple of my family members for sure going through divorce, and my brother is actually just navigating that loss right now, and oldest brother, as well as a few of my good friends, have navigated divorce as well and remarriage. So, kind of where I come into play is the remarriage piece.
So when you met your future husband, how long had he been divorced for?
How long had he been divorced? He had been divorced, I think, about 2 years, but separated for about 3 to almost 4 because of the process. It took quite a while to finalize.
And do you think his own children had processed the separation of their parents?
That's a really good question, Barbara. And I can kind of go back, and my husband and I have had various discussions about that. And it depends on the age of the kids because I think his son was 13 at the time when his wife and him split. And I met him when he was about 18. And he actually seemed to be he managed the loss fairly well. My husband and I talked about it, and his middle son, he was 10 or 11 when the divorce happened, and he struggled the most. And his daughter was 5 at the time when they split, and she was about 10 when we got together. So by the time I met the boys, I think they had come to a place where they had accepted that their parents were divorced and separated. But his daughter was the one who struggled the most, I think. And really, this is actually pretty common, according to the research, that it's younger children. If they're younger, they can navigate, families who remarry much better than the older kids can. Just because in terms of building new relationships and whatnot, younger kids can manage better than the older kids. And research also shows that it's the young kind of preteen girls that have a very, very difficult time with step families and kind of blending. I mean, blending is a misnomer, but for sure they talk about that being a challenging for that gender in that specific age.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think adolescent girls find it more difficult to accept that their parents have divorced and have separated and have found new partners?
Well, and I'll speak from my own personal experience that my stepdaughter and her dad had a pretty close relationship. Her older brothers were, like I said, 16, 17, somewhere around there. And 17, 18, somewhere 19, 18, 19, when I first came into the picture. So they had kind of moved on and done that independence thing on their own accord. So they were pretty much moving towards that. They didn't really want to be or need parents as much because they're more focused on, the later years of schooling and what that means for career development. They're focused on, more of their friends and independence in that regard. But it's the younger preteen years where they're starting to do that identity development, and that they're trying to do that separation and trying to figure out where they fit in. And I think that's just a kind of a general pre-adolescence, adolescence challenge for them anyways. But then to navigate a whole new dynamic shift in terms of, dad dating this woman, that puts it into a challenging perspective. But more specifically, like I said, from my own personal experience, she and her dad were pretty close. And there was a lot of one-on-one time with the two of them because, like I said, her brothers were kind of doing their own thing with their friends. And so the fact that I came in, I think, caused some struggles for her, that she now had to share her dad with somebody else. And I think that can be quite common. And another contributing factor is gender identification. So, if the ex-wife is struggling with a new relationship, the daughter is going to side more with the mom in terms of that gender identification. So those are some of the possibilities about why that can be more of a struggle for, the adolescent, pre-adolescent females.
So other than those struggles, what other struggles do stepmothers have?
The biggest struggles for a stepmom, I would have to say, is figuring out how they fit, and more particularly what their role is. And I'm speaking from my own experience and speaking from the experience of other stepmoms that I've worked with. In the earlier years of stepfamily life, it's very difficult for all of the people to kind of figure out where they fit in the grand scheme of things. So the other work that I do, Barbara, is that I teach and work with adoptive and foster families. And we kind of liken a new member coming into this family as a mobile. So when you have a mobile, right, it's well balanced and the wind can it rebalances itself with a little bit of wind. But if you add an extra chime or an extra, decoration onto this mobile, it throws the whole thing completely off the balance. And so basically that's how we describe, a new mother coming in that just kind of throws the dynamic off. And you have to kind of recalibrate or readjust to a new person coming in. And to make the matter even more challenging is if she brings her own children. So it's navigating everybody's roles, and it's navigating children's feelings about these big changes that are occurring. And research has shown that it can take up to 7 years for a step family to start feeling like they're kind of a more cohesive unit. And sometimes step families may never get to that stage where they're feeling like a cohesive unit.
That journey has a lot to do with how the parents on both sides handle it, and the way their language that they use, the actions that they do. And if one of the partners is still angry or bitter or hasn't dealt with the breakup in a adult way, or come to the realization or come to the idea that the relationship is broken and is never going to get back together, if they project those sort of feelings and thoughts onto their children, then that can also disrupt the cycle, can't it, of everybody grieving, getting over the breakup.
Oh, absolutely. So when we have an ex-partner who's having a hard time with their own grief and loss and struggling with resolution of that, you described it perfectly, and that's exactly what can happen, is that those unresolved anger issues or whatever can absolutely have an impact on the child's ability and willingness to not only move through their grief and loss cycle, but feel like or be accepting of this new family situation. and that makes it a struggle for everybody. And quite often, now here's the thing, I don't know really if there's a similar research done. I would imagine there is, but most of the research I do, like I said, is stepmother related. And there's quite a few resources on that. And I'm not trying to be too abrasive with the language that I'm using. I'm just going by the title of a book. One of the books is called Nobody's the Bitch, and that's about high conflict. They call them high conflict exes or ex-partners. And that one is by, I can't remember her name, I'm sorry, but it's a pretty easy title to look up. And then there's a subsequent one by the author of Nobody's the Bitch, and it's written by another author, co-author, Jenna Korf, and it's called Skirts at War. And it talks about how to manage high conflict ex-wives. I'm not sure really that the conflict between a stepdad and a biological dad is there to the extreme that it is for stepmoms and biological moms. And basically the research shows is that's typically associated with the fact that women, there's that gender stereotype of women being nurturers and women having that mothering gene in their body, so to speak, that they automatically, love kids and take on kids and can take them under their wing and nurture them and love every child as if they are their own. I think the research is kind of indicating, I wouldn't say it point blank, but going by recall of the research that I've done, is that it becomes a little bit more territorial than it would be for men. That being said, I have heard about it with, biological dads and stepdads. There's some territoriality kind of testing their, role and where do they fit on the hierarchy, but it's much, much stronger amongst women is what the research is showing.
So getting back to the children, if you're a parent and you have broken up with your partner and you see that the children are struggling to get over the breakup or process it, what guidelines or what recommendations would you give a parent to help their child through that process?
Well, there's a few things that I would suggest, and one of them is that it's just being cognizant that everybody has their own timeline. That when it comes to your own personal timeline about how you're going to go through the shock and the protest and the despair and then finally acceptance, because those are some of the four typical kind of parts, if you will, of the grief and loss cycle, that, some people are going to go through that piece a little bit quicker. So if you yourself can manage to go through that quicker, but you see two different children doing it differently, just understand that everybody's got their own process and their own timelines, and that we have to be respectful that everybody does it a little bit differently. Another key piece that's really, really important to keep in mind is the fact that we have children who may struggle, and they may struggle with the depression part of it or the despair part of it. And that means that if they're stuck in that kind of despair part, that if they are feeling depressed, that they need to have some assistance. So in that point, they may have to seek psychological or counseling or therapeutic supports to navigate that loss. One of the things, too, that I talk about is with the parents is that they need to understand that the kids need to have the opportunity to feel safe and respected in terms of talking about their feelings and being able to talk about that in a safe and non-judgmental way. And again, that kind of ties back into the piece about, you need to understand that everybody goes through their own cycle at their own speed. But making sure that, the child has an opportunity to talk about their feelings. If the parent is capable of doing that, then that's obviously the first person that they should go to. But if they have, trusted family members or friends that can support that child, just giving that child the opportunity to talk is a big piece. And there's lots of books out there too now, Barbara, for kids who are navigating grief and loss. So I can't think off the top of my head about that, but I know there's an author named Colleen Lemaire, And her book series is actually called the I Have series. So that's another resource for your listeners as well, if they're interested in trying to find some information on, how to support children going through grief and loss. And when I think even in their local library, they can probably find some resources in regards to grief and loss. It really is about, giving children the opportunity to talk about their feelings and just normalize what they're going through and just being understanding and empathetic to the situation.
And I guess listening to them in a non-judgmental way, and if they have got a beef with their ex-partner, to put that aside.
Absolutely. That's kind of the critical thing. And it's interesting because the research shows that it's not necessarily a divorce that causes poor and negative outcomes for children, because lots of people think, oh, your parents divorced, so no wonder you are the way that you are. And there's a lot of myths around that. And the research actually shows that kids whose parents are divorced but have parents who handled their relationship demise in an amicable, at least, and respectful manner, that they do quite well. And if the newer parents, like the step parents, can work in a positive fashion with the biological parent in their home, that also makes a big difference. But absolutely, the more conflictual the relationship is between the ex-partners, the much more difficult it is for children in terms of, everything from, their own relationship demise, like divorce and separation, that type of thing, as well as mental health issues down the road. So it absolutely has a big impact if an ex-couple is very conflictual. So yeah, for sure, if you got to deal with your own stuff, you got to deal with your own grief and loss, you got to let the anger go. And if you can't let the anger go, there's ways to manage that. And I can bring up co-parenting and parallel parenting between ex-partners, and that absolutely is important for children to know that, if their parents can get along, perfect, but if their parents can't, there's ways to keep the kids out of the adult conversations and the mess that's going on between the two of them.
Yes, I guess we've only touched slightly on what it's like to be a step parent, and we'll probably have to do that in another episode. So I hope you will come back, Ali, and we can
For
discuss
sure.
more in depth about the relationship you can have with your stepchildren. If people want to find out more about what you do or connect with you, how will they do that?
Well, I have a website that's called Step by Step Mom, and I have services and I have some resources. So they can get in touch with me through www.aliwilks.com. I also have a Facebook page called Step by Step Mom. I'm also can be found on the LinkedIn under Ali Wilks. I'm on Twitter at Ali_Wilks. And just an email address I can give is Ali Wilks, so ALIWILKS at xplornet.ca. So I've given you a few resources and hope that'll help somebody.
Thank you, Ali, for coming on Breakup Recovery podcast and sharing your information on parenting, step parenting. I think we covered quite a lot of subjects on grief and loss and children. So thank you for sharing your knowledge, and I hope I get you back real soon so we can talk about step parenting.
For sure. My pleasure, Barbara. Nice chatting with you again.
I hope that you have got something from this episode, number 087. How to navigate grief and loss for yourself and your children after your breakup, with Ali Wilks. I would just like to mention that sometimes during the course of this interview that the sound was not very good on my end, so I apologise for that. I'd also like to say if you're still struggling to get over your breakup and feel that you need some assistance and would like to work with me one-on-one, then contact me via my website barbarastevens.com.au or message me on my Facebook page Barbara Stevens Breakup Recovery Mentor. If you found some value from this episode and know someone else who would also find Breakup Recovery podcasts useful, then please share the podcast with them. All the episodes are on my website, iTunes, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. Listeners have asked how they can help support the podcast, and Patreon is one way to help. So if you think this show is worth $1 every episode or $1 every month, and you feel that you can afford that amount, then I am grateful for any amount of money you can pledge, because every little bit helps. So why not head over to my Patreon page and take a look? The link to that would be www.patreon.com/breakuprecovery. No contribution is too small, and I appreciate your support so that I can improve Breakup Recovery podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions, or just want to email me, then my details are on my website, barbarastevens.com.au. And the last thing I'd like to say is, be gentle on yourself. You deserve happiness.
If you would like to hear previous Breakup Recovery podcasts, visit barbarastevens.com.au. Connect with Barbara Stevens on social media with Barbara Stevens Breakup Recovery Mentor on Facebook and at You'll Be Okay on Twitter. Read further blogs, view webinar replays, and download your free ebook, 3 Easy Steps to Surviving Your Breakup, and much more at barbarastevens.com.au.